Colin Powell was the U.S. Secretary of State on 9/11. That made him President Bush's point man on the world stage. He made the case for war with Iraq at the United Nations. On behalf of the administration, Powell claimed Saddam Hussein was trying to buy raw material from Africa to build nuclear weapons, and he gave an elaborate description of an Iraqi weapons program that, as it turned out, never existed.
Ambition and hatred are enough to bring Iraq and al-Qaeda together, enough so al-Qaeda could learn how to build more sophisticated bombs and learn how to forge documents, and enough so that al-Qaeda could turn to Iraq for help in acquiring expertise on weapons of mass destruction.
What happened in 2002 was that these assessments dramatically changed, but not because of new evidence. As Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld said today in testimony before the Congress, quote, "The coalition did not act in Iraq because we had discovered dramatic new evidence of Iraq's pursuit of weapons of mass destruction. We acted because we saw the evidence in a dramatic new light through the prism of our experience of 9/11. Well, this is a shocking statement. If Secretary Rumsfeld had made this statement a year ago or 6 months ago, there would have been a very different debate about the war. The administration officials repeatedly gave the impression and in fact said that they had new evidence. They repeatedly cited very specific instances where there were weapons. We know without a doubt, we know with great certainty. Donald Rumsfeld himself said we know they're here, here, and here. Well, that has got to be new evidence because it sure wasn't in the CIA reports.
Colin Luther Powell was an American politician, diplomat, and four-star general who served as the 65th United States Secretary of State from 2001 to 2005 under U.S. President George Bush. He also served as the 12th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff while oversaw 28 crises, including the invasion of Panama in 1989, Operation Desert Storm in the Persian Gulf, and Iraq in 1990-91. Earlier today, Powell was being treated for multiple myeloma. He died at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center from complications due to COVID-19 at the age of 84. However, Powell will always be remembered as the man who went before the United Nations Security Council on February 5, 2003, and produced misleading and outright false intelligence reports claiming Iraq had manufactured chemical and biological weapons of mass destruction. His reports were the primary and sole reason for the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq on March 20, 2003. Today, we'll talk about this instance in which Colin Powell produced misleading and corroborated and false intelligence. I will read some excerpts about Powell from an article written by John Schwartz from The Intercept, where the headline, "Lie After Lie, What Colin Powell Knew About Iraq 15 Years Ago and What He Told the UN." It's actually a very good article which details specifically the points where Colin Powell produced misleading statements and outright false. In one of Powell's statements, he says, "It strikes me as quite odd that these aluminum tubes are manufactured to be a tolerance that far exceeds U.S. requirements for comparable rockets. Maybe Iraqis just manufactured their conventional weapons to a higher standard than we do, but I don't think so." However, Powell's own intelligence staff, the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, prepared 2 memos commenting on drafts of their presentation. They were later quietly released on appendices to the Senate Intelligence Committee report on weapons of mass destruction intelligence. The second INR memo, written on February 3rd, 2003, told Powell this: "One key remaining concern is the claim that the tubes are manufactured to a tolerance that far exceeds U.S. requirements for comparable rockets. In fact, the most comparable U.S. system is a tactical rocket. The U.S. Mark 66 air-launched 7-millimeter rocket that uses the same high-grade aluminum and that has specifications with similar tolerances. Note that the MK-66 specifications are unclassified. The department is planning to share them with the International Atomic Energy Agency. Powell also played an intercept of a conversation between Iraqi army officers about the UN inspections. However, when he translated what they were saying, he knowingly embellished it, turning it from evidence Iraq was complying with U.S. resolutions to evidence Iraq was violating them. And this appeared in Bob Woodward's book, Plan of Attack. Quote, Powell had decided to add his personal interpretation of the intercepts to the rehearsed script, taking them substantially further and casting them in the most negative light. Concerning the intercept about inspecting for the possibility of forbidden ammo, Powell took the interpretation further. Clean out all of the areas. Make sure there is nothing there. None of this was in the intercept. Here's the conversation as Powell, end quote. Here's the conversation as Powell presented it at the UN, as Woodward reported. Powell, they'll be inspecting the ammunition you have, yes? Yes. For the possibility there are forbidden ammo. For the possibility there is a chance of forbidden ammo. Yes. And we sent you a message yesterday to clean out all of the areas, the scrap areas, the abandoned areas. Make sure there was nothing there. Powell then explained, this is all part of a system of hiding things and moving things out of the way and making sure they have left nothing behind. According to the official State Department translation and confirmed for the Iraqi soldier merely said, and we sent you a message to inspect the scrap areas and the abandoned areas. Different interpretation, if you ask me. And it's no surprise the Iraqi said this. Here's what the CIA's report on Iraqis' non-existent weapons of mass destruction found out about what was going on within the Iraqi government just before the January 30th intercepted conversation. Quote, the NMD director met with Republican-garbed military leaders on January 25th, 2003, and advised them that they were to sign documents saying that there was no weapons of mass destruction in their units, according to a former Iraqi senior officer. Hussein Amin told them that the government would hold them responsible if the UNMOVIC found any weapons of mass destruction in their units or areas, or if there was anything that can cast doubt on Iraqis' cooperation with the UNMOVIC. Commanders established committees to ensure the units retain no evidence of old weapons of mass destruction. End quote. Again, Powell took evidence of the Iraqis doing what they were supposed to do, searching their gigantic ammunition dumps to make sure they weren't accidentally holding on to banned chemical weapons, and doctored it to make it look as if Iraq was hiding banned weapons. Also, Powell's presentation left out extremely important information. This is from Powell, quote, Iraqi's record on chemical weapons is replete with lies. It took years for Iraq to finally admit that he had produced 4 tons of the deadly nerve agent VX. A single drop of VX on their skin will kill in minutes. 4 tons. The admission only came out after inspectors collected documentation as a result of the defection of Hussein Kamal, Saddam Hussein's late son-in-law. End quote. As far as this went, this was accurate. However, Kamal, the head of Iraqi's weapons of mass destruction programs, defected in 1995 Iraq had produced this VX before the Gulf War in 1991. Before. 12 years before. And according to Kamal, Iraq had secretly destroyed it soon after the war. Let me repeat that. According to their source, Hussein Kamal, Iraq had secretly destroyed it soon after the war. Then they lied about even producing it until his defection. But according to Kamal, they weren't lying when they said they had no longer had it. Indeed, in the UN's notes from Kamal's debriefing, he said Iraq had no remaining weapons of mass destruction of any kind. According to Kamal, quote, all chemical weapons were destroyed. I ordered destruction of all chemical weapons. All weapons, biological, chemical, missiles, nuclear. All were destroyed. End quote. And if that weren't enough, Kamal also said in an interview on CNN with correspondent Brett Sadler, can you state here and now, does Iraq still to this day hold weapons of mass destruction? Kamal, no. Iraq does not possess any weapons of mass destruction. I am being completely honest about this. But in 1996, Kamal returned to Iraq where he was killed by Saddam's regime. Thus, the United States could safely take a witness who truthfully had said Iraq had no remaining banned weapons and pretend his testimony indicated the exact opposite. Did Powell know what he was doing at the time? But that's unclear. Here's a transcript of an exchange between Powell and Sam Husseini of the Institute for Public Accuracy in Washington in December of 2006. Husseini, you cited Hussein Kamal in your UN testimony. Did you know he said there were no weapons of mass destruction? Powell, I only knew what the intelligence community told me. Husseini, but did you know that fact? Powell, of course not. Husseini, you didn't know that, even though it was reported. Powell, I've answered your question. I don't think I need to read any more for you. Just days after Powell's speech at the UN Security Council, United Nations Chief Inspector Hans Blix on February 14, 2003, presented a report to the Security Council. Blix gave an update of the situation in Iraq, and he stated that the Iraqis were now more proactive in their cooperation. And he also rebutted some of the arguments proposed by Powell just a week prior at the council. Blix questioned the interpretations of the satellite images put forward by Powell and stated that alternate interpretations of the satellite images were credible. He also stated that the Iraqis have in fact never received early warnings of the inspectors visiting any sites, an allegation made by Powell during the presentation. The International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Mohammed El-Bariti also said he did not believe the Iraqis have a nuclear weapons program, unlike what Powell had claimed. This report of February 14th and the protests of February 16th appeared to have created reluctance in some of the members of the Security Council over the proposed war on Iraq. Meanwhile, a second resolution was being drafted with the intention that it would find Iraq in material breach, and the serious consequences of Resolution 1441 should be implemented. The staggering death toll from the Iraq War is basically absurd, morbid, if you will. It is reported from the Lancet report in its 2006 study that it has been estimated that over 600,000 Iraqis were killed in just the first 40 months of the war and occupation of Iraq, along with 54,000 nonviolent but still war-related deaths. Where other reports show a catastrophic estimate of a total approximately 2.4 million Iraqi deaths since the 2003 invasion. Not to mention the carryover effect into Syria, in which, thanks to L. Paul Bremer's Iraqi Resolution Provision number 1 and 2, which liquidated the military and law enforcement entities, which created the chaos and destruction of Mosul, of cities in Iraq, the destruction of the Shiites, cities like Al-Qasim, Al-Hilla, Baghdad, Basra, Baquba, Fallujah, Haditha, Najaf, Narisya, Tikrit. The death toll is staggering. And the people who are behind the false intelligence, which is primarily the Central Intelligence Agency under Director George Tenet, in which they tortured a man by the name of Sheikh Ibn al-Libi, a Libyan national who was captured in Afghanistan in November of 2001, where he was interrogated by American and Egyptian forces. When he was captured, al-Libi was turned over to the FBI and held at Bagram Air Force Base. When he was talking to FBI interrogators Russell Fincher and Marty Mahone, he seemed genuinely friendly, spoke chiefly in English, calling for a translator only when necessary. He seemed to have a bond with Fincher. Al-Libi told investigators the details about Richard Reed, a British citizen who had joined al-Qaeda and trained to carry out the suicide bombing of an airliner on December 22nd, 2001, which was unsuccessful. However, much like anything they touched, the CIA asked President Bush for permission to take al-Libi into their own custody and rendition him to a foreign country for more tough guy questions, just like they did with Abu Zubaydah, where the FBI was getting somewhere with Zubaydah and also with al-Libi. The CIA basically intervened. One CIA officer was heard telling al-Libi, "You know where you're going? Before you get there, we're going to find your mother and fuck her." In the second week of January 2002, al-Libi was flown to the USS Bataan in the North Arabian Sea. Then he was transferred to Egyptian interrogators, where he was waterboarded, punched, slapped, head beaten on a wall, strung up by his wrists for hours on end. Well, the information he gave, one important piece of information, was regarding Iraq. Al-Libi told his CIA torturers that he was a principal source of faulty, well, now it's faulty, but intelligence regarding chemical weapons training between Iraq and al-Qaeda. He specifically told interrogators that Iraq provided training to al-Qaeda in the area of chemical and biological weapons. This claim was repeated several times in the run-up to the war, including in the Powell's speech at the UN Security Council, which concluded with a long recitation of the information provided by al-Libi, which came from the torture by the CIA. However, al-Libi recanted these claims in January 2004 after U.S. interrogators presented new evidence from other detainees that casted doubt on his claims. And that's according to Newsweek. An article written by Newsweek called Iraq and al-Qaeda April 23, 2009. The Defense Intelligence Agency concluded in February 2002 that al-Libi deliberately misled interrogators in what the CIA called an attempt to exaggerate his importance. Al-Libi then said, and this would be the final obvious truth, he gave false information due to the use of the torture program, which was called enhanced interrogating techniques, from his CIA handlers. There was a Senate Select report in 2006 which reported, quote, according to al-Libi, after his decision to fabricate information for debriefers, he lied about being a member of al-Qaeda, although he considered himself close to, but not a member of al-Qaeda. He knew enough about the senior members' organization and operations to claim to be a member. On September 8, 2006, the United States Senate Select Committee on Intelligence released phase 2 of its report. Quote, post-war findings support the Defense Intelligence Agency February 2002 assessment that Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi was likely intentionally misleading his debriefers when he said that Iraq provided two al-Qaeda associates with chemical and biological weapons. Post-war findings do not support the Central Intelligence Agency's assessment that his reporting was credible. No post-war information has been found that indicates CBW, chemical and biological weapons, training occurred, and the detainee who provided the key pre-war reporting about his training recanted his claims after the war. CIA's January 2003 version of Iraqi support for terrorism described al-Libi's reporting for CBW training credible, but noted that the individuals who traveled to Iraq for CBW training had not returned. So al-Libi was not in position to know if the training had taken place. In January 2004, al-Libi recanted his allegations about CBW training and many of his other claims about Iraq's links to al-Qaeda. He told debriefers that to the best of his knowledge, al-Qaeda never sent any individuals into Iraq for any kind of support of chemicals or biological weapons. Al-Libi told debriefers that he fabricated information while in U.S. custody to receive better treatment and in response to threats of being transferred to a foreign intelligence service, what he believed would torture him. He said that later, while he was being debriefed by a foreign intelligence service, he fabricated more information in response to physical abuse and threats of torture. The foreign government service denies any pressure during al-Libi's interrogation. In February 2004, the CIA reissued the debriefing reports from al-Libi to note that he had recanted information. A CIA officer explained that while CIA believes al-Libi fabricated information, the CIA cannot determine whether or what portions of the original statements of the latter recants are true or false, end quote. According to the CIA's own reports, the information was not credible. According to al-Libi, it never happened. According to the Senate Select Committee, the report is false. Yet, according to the Bush White House, from its CIA Director George Tenet, from Secretary of State Colin Powell, it was enough to go to war, which led to the deaths of 2.4 million Iraqis. Colin Powell's death will be met with my silence.
The relatives, the public, need to know this information because any human death is actually a public tragedy. The moment an American soldier or a British soldier dies, the next page in the newspaper, the fact of it is announced, their name, their age, where they were, some personalizing, humanizing detail about them. All victims of war, including civilians, deserve that same level of respectful acknowledgement. And here we have names coming into the public domain for the first time, which the American government knew about for 6 years and has not released. Families will never give up on this. They will wait decades, centuries, if needed, for the full and proper recognition of the deaths of their loved ones. The number of civilians who died that we didn't know about before, personal details, occupation, age, gender, precisely how they died, all of this information is there in those logs in enormous amount, and it's going to take months and months, if not years, to analyse it all. But we've made a start, and we believe it's in the public interest that everything possible is known about these tragedies.